All right, hi again everyone. This is the lecture for Module 2, so this will run for the next 2 weeks. I have the date starting on Monday the 8th and then running for the next 2 weeks for Module 2, and I'll post the video for Module 3 just before the Monday that starts. I don't have that date in front of me right now, but this is the lecture for Module 2. Before getting started with the lecture material, I want to thank everyone for your activity on the Angel page so far. It's been really great to see all of the comments. I'm actually getting ready to go on vacation tomorrow, so I'm going to read through all the comments in more detail tonight and leave some replies for all of you, but I wanted to get this posted first. So thanks so much for that, and I will be leaving some replies later in the evening from when I'm leaving this lecture. So I'll be more brief this time for sure. The article is a really classic article, the one that you were assigned to read for the next 2-week period. I don't know if you're watching this before you read the article or after. Either one works for me. But I do want to encourage you all to read this article really carefully. It's about 20 or 21 pages total without the references, and it's a really classic article. And it talks about the trans-theoretical model of change, which is what the stages of change come out of. And the two authors are really well known and have just done amazing work in the field of addiction treatment. So this is the core of the stages of change model that I spoke about during the intensive, and I think you'll get lots of great information. I also want to remind everyone that the first of the 2 meetings that you need to attend is assigned to occur during this week. So I think one of the questions that I'd love to see some commentary on is when you go to the first of these 2 meetings, whatever 12-step meeting or whatever meeting you elect to go to, look for stages of change. I encourage you to read the article first and then look for the different stages of change that you see in the room. At 12-step meetings, oftentimes there are individuals that are mandated to go. I joked around about look for a van outside of a meeting and you'll know it's people coming from a treatment center. And that's where you'll get the greatest variance in stage of change, individuals all the way from pre-contemplation up until action stage. So look for that. And so to post, a post to comment would be what stages of change you witnessed at the meetings and what thoughts that you have on having witnessed or been exposed to different stages of change. For those of you who are in more rural areas or may have a difficult time finding actual physical meetings to go to, look online for virtual meetings. I know they exist. Again, you always want to look to make sure it's an open meeting. Any meeting that is an open meeting is fine for you to attend. Any meeting that's a closed meeting, and there'll be keys when you look at meetings. There'll be different keys for describing what kind of meeting it is. A C will mean a closed meeting, generally an O means an open meeting. And remember, I'm intentionally not giving you a lot of instruction on how to find meetings because I want each of you to have the experience of what it's like for a client to have to do this homework on their own, to figure out where meetings are, to build up the courage and the confidence to be able to go. I'm really seeking for each of you to have that first-hand experience. So when you ask clients to do this, you'll know what it's like because you'll have done it yourself. Okay, so this article, I'll focus on a few points and then I'll look for your comments and your feedback from what I'm saying and from your reading on the Angel page. So there's 2 real main points that are made in the article, and the first half of the article is about identifying stages of change, defining the different stages of change, and the second half of the article are the processes that help individuals to move through the stages of change. Remember that stages of change in motivational interviewing are separate and distinct, arose as separate and distinct programs, if you will. I apologize, I do have a cold, so I'm not thinking as sharply as I would like to be. But they arose in the literature under different circumstances. Motivational interviewing has now been taken on to be the most effective way of moving individuals through the stage of change. So the authors in this article in the second half talk about processes of change, and a lot of that may look familiar from what we spoke about with motivational interviewing. There are 3 points, or 3 of the figures and tables that I wanted to point out. Figure 1 on page 677 is really important, and it was really great for me to be re-exposed to that as I reviewed the article. It shows the stages of change in a spiral and not laid out linear 1 through 5. And that's, again, incredibly important to remember. The stages of change are variable. They depend on a lot of different circumstances. A person can achieve an action state of change or a maintenance stage of change, which means they're really looking to change their lives and are doing so. They can have an event based on their environment that causes them to relapse. For a number of reasons, people relapse, and then they may go all the way back to pre-contemplation. That's spoken about in the article, and the graphic representation, again, on page 677 is really good to display that. The table on page 683, table 1, talks about the different processes of change, and I would study this really carefully, if not now, as you move forward in your training, because when you start to sit with clients, it's going to be really helpful to have these tools in your tool bag to be able to meet and work with clients on change. Because again, what I value about addiction and stages of change and motivational interviewing, the principles that we use in addiction treatment apply to any kind of behavioral change, and just about everybody that shows up to see you will be seeking to change their behavior in some way. So these processes of change, as described on page 683, are incredibly helpful in working with clients. Table 2, which is a few pages later, unfortunately I didn't write that page number down, a few pages past 683, talks about the different stages of change and what processes of change are the most useful based on stage of change, and I think that's a wonderful thing to review. You can apply a process that's not workable for someone at, say, a pre-contemplation stage of change, and it's just not going to be helpful. And I'll elaborate now on that point with some real-world examples. Then I'll make one more point, and then I'll finish up for this lecture. So one of the things I think I shared during the intensive that makes me crazy as a clinician and was difficult as a clinical director was to see all of the interventions at the rehab center where I worked be based in the action stage of change. Most rehab facilities and a lot of therapists treat clients as if they're in an action stage of change, which means they know they have a problem, they know they want to change the problem, they've worked through all the pros and cons, and the pros outweigh the cons, and they absolutely want to work toward making change. It's a very, very small percentage of people who show up for help already in the action stage of change. So when our interventions are based on a stage of change that a person hasn't achieved, then we're actually, at best, doing nothing effective, and at worst, we're actually hurting the potential for future change, because individuals can start to feel demoralized, they can start to feel shame and guilt in that they're not acting correctly or acting properly, so they will withdraw from therapy or withdraw from treatment. And if they come to learn that that's what treatment is about, that you have to be ready, you have to be able to follow through on everything that's asked of you, if that becomes the meaning of treatment or therapy, and they never get to a point where they actually feel like they could follow through on what was being asked of them, that person may never seek help again. And that's not an outcome any of us want in offering help to people. So matching intervention to stage of change is one of the most critical components of working from a stages of change and motivational interviewing perspective. The final point that I want to make on this is this article was written in the early 90s, and they really did anticipate, I think quite accurately, what was happening in the field of psychotherapy. And that's the integration of approaches to psychotherapy or systems of psychotherapy. That's why they call their model the trans-theoretical model of change. It suggests that different interventions or strategies be used across the different theoretical orientations that exist in the world of psychotherapy. What we've seen now with things like dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT, and acceptance commitment therapy, ACT, I mentioned those during the intensive, they really are blends of, to some degree, non-dual wisdom traditions, which is where transpersonal psychology has so much to offer, and a combination in dialectical behavioral therapy of a really strong humanistic, existential humanistic component with a very profound commitment to behaviorism and behavioral change. At the time this article was written, and in the decades before this article was written, there were very, very strong camps that existed in the psychotherapy world where a humanist and a behaviorist wouldn't even talk to one another. It's as if they spoke completely different languages. Those camps still exist, as I articulated again during the intensive, but they're being reduced, and we have these integrative therapies, again, like ACT and DBT, that have emerged that really illustrate what the authors were trying to establish at their time in the early 90s. And I think we have arrived now. It's called third wave behaviorism. It's something you can Google. Third wave behaviorism, and I'm even starting to hear fourth wave behaviorism now. It's the inclusion of mindfulness, the inclusion of spiritual traditions, the inclusion of humanistic principles within behavioral therapies. I find this to be tremendously exciting for our field because we're using what Marsha Linehan in DBT calls the technologies of acceptance and the technologies of change, and we're combining them and using them together to treat really, in addiction, very difficult recalcitrant behaviors effectively. And the art of psychotherapy becomes the balance of acceptance with change. The stages of change and motivational interviewing are incredible core skills and theoretical frames to have early in your development as clinicians. And using this work and looking through this lens as you go to these 12-step meetings and think about addiction and addiction treatment throughout the rest of this quarter is, if you can really dig into it and really start to understand what's being offered through these theories, I think it'll give you a really strong leg up on getting started with clients when you start seeing clients down the road. I hope this was clear. Again, I do have quite a bad cold and am not thinking as clearly as I'd like to. So if there are any questions or if anything wasn't clear, please let me know either by email or through the postings on the Angel page, and I'd be happy to clarify anything if there are any questions with what I said. In the meantime, I hope everyone has a good couple of weeks. I will be away and unavailable for contact from the 6th through the 14th, returning on the 15th, which is Monday, a week from Monday. So there won't be any activity from me between Saturday, tomorrow, and which is the 7th, depending on when you're watching this. So from the 7th to the 14th, I'll be out of contact altogether, but back online again on the 15th. So I hope everyone enjoys the reading of the article, enjoys the meeting, the first meeting that you're going to go to, and I really look forward to hearing what you have to say. Okay, take care.